So it gives me a lot of pleasure to introduce our poet, Daniel, tonight. We're very glad to have him here. Thank you, David, too. So this should be the question of, what is the announcement? When I hold up the cell phone. Yes, we go to the one of the theater groups, the Clackamas Repertory Theater we go to. They have a recording of cell phones ringing. But please turn off any electronic devices, that you have. Daniel was born in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and grew up in Portland. He has an undergraduate degree from Maryland University and a graduate degree from St. Martin's University in Lacey, Washington. His award-winning poetry has been published in a variety of publications and anthologies. His chapbook, Gold, Daniel Skach Mills's Greatest Hits, 1990-2000, was published by Putting Books in 2001. And a full-length collection, the Dow of Now, 2008, was listed as one of the 150 outstanding books of Oregon poetry by Jeff Baker, David Beispiel, and Jim Shepke, who was the Oregon State Librarian. In addition, Daniel has his new book out, which he is going to be talking about, The Hut Beneath the Pine, Tea Poems, just out. He's been a featured reader in the Northwest for events at a variety of locations. He is a volunteer docent for Lansu Chinese Garden since 2005. He was invited to Mexico City, 2009, to give a presentation on classical Chinese gardens and Taoism. He has lived both as a Benedictine and a Trappist monk. He currently resides with his partner in Portland, Oregon. And on a personal note, it's a very pleasure for me to make a connection with friends, old friends from our church in St. Francis. So welcome to you. Would you join me in welcoming our poet this evening, Daniel Skach Mills.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, all of you, for being here tonight. And thank you again to the city of Milwaukie for sponsoring something like this. This is incredible, a city sponsoring a poetry series. It is so heartening to see something like this happening. So again, thank you very much. So when I spoke to Tom on the phone, I understood that this is kind of a reading and a talk at the same time, and I have, an hour to talk and read, and then there's going to be 30 minutes for questions, is that right?
Well, usually the poet goes 40 to 60 minutes.
40 to 60 minutes.
Reading. It can be as interactive as you would like if you want to take questions during that. Often that happens after the reading.
Okay.
5 days.
So after the reading.
People have questions.
Okay, that sounds great.
Socializing and networking and coffee and tea and cookies.
Okay, so
Talking to you afterwards.
absolutely. So, and again, please feel free. It's kind of a long stretch to maybe be sitting and listening. Feel free to get up and stand up at the back, or use your, use the washroom or whatever you need to do to take care of your needs while you're here. So I will be reading tonight from two books, as Tom mentioned, The Dow of Now and The Hut Beneath the Pine. And if there is time, possibly some work from a third work, which is currently in process, which is a collection of poems based on my monastic experience titled In This Forest of Monks, but we will see how far we get this evening. So the first book, The Dow of Now, a collection of 81 poems published by Ken Arnold Books in 2008. And the book was really kind of a surprise. I was teaching classes at the local First Unitarian Church on present moment awareness. People would ask questions, different insights would come. I began to jot the insights down on the class syllabus. And then over time, more and more of these insights started to present themselves. And within about 3 months, I had over 100 poems. And at that time, a poem of mine was published in Sojourners. The publisher saw it, contacted me, asked me if I had any manuscripts. You know how often that happens. And the rest is history. So the book really found its own way. It was very, very effortless on all fronts. And the book primarily is about living in the present moment, the way of now, the Dao of Now, and we'll talk more about Dao as I move along tonight. The second book, The Hut Beneath the Pine, really kind of dovetails off the first book because I had some leftover poems from the Dao of Now, and I was looking at them and wondering, well, where do these want to go? Are they really coming together in any particular form? And there was only one poem about tea in the Dao of Now, and there were a few leftover poems that were about tea, and slowly over time, spending time in the Chinese garden, spending time in the tea house, these tea poems began to present themselves. And so this is a collection again of about 33 tea poems. And the collection also came out of my experience of looking around at our culture, especially at young people, and noticing the impact that technology is having on the culture. Seeing young people leaving school on cell phones, text messaging. They don't seem to be connecting with one another. They don't seem to be connecting with the environment. And asking myself, what begins to happen when people's ears are plugged up with headphones and you can no longer hear the wind? You can no longer hear the birds. You can no longer hear the rain. You no longer see the birds. You no longer see the clouds because you're hooked into some sort of a gadget, which can be a very practical tool, but it depends on how much of your life it begins to take up. And so these poems were really kind of a response to, well, how can one begin to re-realize some kind of a connection with nature? And going back to the Taoist sages, tea was a way to do this, the proper preparation and drinking of tea. So this is where The Hut Beneath the Pine comes from. The title of The Hut Beneath the Pine comes from a wonderful quote by a Japanese musician who lived from about 1450 to 1524, Toyohara Sumiyoki. And he wrote, "Tea is a place to escape to when you cannot ease your cares in the mountains. Tea is the hut beneath the pine in the midst of the city." I don't think you can say it any better than that. That really encapsulates the whole experience. And what exactly is the hut beneath the pine? Well, I will read a brief excerpt from the introduction. The hut beneath the pine is the hermitage of the Taoist sage recluse in the midst of the city. It's a retreat, a sanctuary, where for a brief period you can shake off the dust of the world. Like the tea leaves in your bowl, you can reawaken to the larger flow of life and nature, not as separate from yourself, but as who and what you have always been. Realizing and then embodying this truth on ever deeper levels is the beginning of sanity. And I'll be reading back and forth between the two books as we go along, so I'll be alternating between the two. This may be the first poetry reading you've been to where there are handouts. There will not be a pop quiz at the end. But people often come up later and they ask me, what are the differences between the Western worldview and the Taoist Eastern worldview? And it's a really good question, because how many of you have been to the Chinese garden downtown, by the way? Oh, wonderful. I bow to you. A wonderful place, absolutely. It's like a little jewel box in the middle of the city. And what you will realize very quickly if you've been to the garden is that if you try to squeeze the garden through a Western Greco-Roman worldview, it doesn't work. In the same way that the poetry you are hearing tonight, if you try to squeeze it through that same Western Greco-Roman worldview, it is not going to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to use this list that you have and kind of go down the list and find poems from the two books that correspond to these different listings that you have on the handout as we go along. So on your handout, the very first column under the Western Greco-Roman worldview, the West is very mind-dominated. The focus is on the rational intellect as a way to know, figure out, and control. Thinking is identified with as a self. And of course, in the 17th century, this really kind of reached its pinnacle when the French philosopher René Descartes posed his famous dictum, which was, "I think, therefore I am." And we have been operating out of that ever since. On the right-hand side, the Taoist worldview, the emphasis is on not knowing, on being. Thinking is a practical tool to break things down and analyze, but it is limited. It's not who and what you are, nor can it conceptually grasp the ultimate reality, the Tao, which we'll talk more about. So right away, not knowing. Westerners can hear that and go, well, what does that mean? Well, first of all, it doesn't mean that you become passively stupid. That is a real misunderstanding. There are two aspects to not knowing. And first of all, it's not anti-intellectual. It's simply realizing that your thoughts about reality are not reality itself. The tools you are using to measure the world is not the thing being measured. The definition is not the thing that's being defined. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Alan Watts. Alan was a wonderful Asia scholar, Episcopal minister, self-proclaimed spiritual entertainer, who died in 1973, and he had a great image for this. He said that the mind weaves a web to catch the universe in the very same way that a spider weaves a web to catch flies. It's all part of the movement of nature. But there is more to the universe than the net you are weaving to catch it. And if you aren't able to see through that net to that more, to what that more is, you're going to be stuck. In the same way that if I don't stop talking to hear what you're saying, I can't hear you. So again, it isn't anti-intellectual at all. The Hut Beneath the Pine. And there is a sequence in the book entitled The Hut Beneath the Pine, and there are 18 poems in that, and they're actually titled numerically. So this is number 1. The human world teaches people how to compete, get noticed, succeed. Here in my little garden, success is whatever happens to be blooming at the moment. Renown, the full moon throwing its short-lived silver spotlight onto the pond. 20 years of so-called education, and just look at all the unlearning I have had to do in order to truly taste this one bowl of tea. Unlearning. Unlearning what? All my conditioned, habitual responses to life. The second aspect of not knowing is that the conceptual mind will never be able to grasp the ultimate reality. Because the ultimate reality, at least from this worldview, is completely non-conceptual. It can't be grasped with the thinking mind. And this tradition is actually available to us in the West, in Western Christianity, although you really have to dig to find it because it's buried under a very top-heavy, mind-heavy institution and way of seeing the world. It was the via negativa, the negative way of knowing. And St. John of the Cross spoke of this when he wrote, "O night that was my guide, O night more loving than the rising sun." The darkness. The Tao Te Ching puts this another way. Darkness within darkness, the way of all knowing. What is darkness within darkness? The mind that knows that it doesn't know. Those who are truly free aren't identified with their own thinking. Those identified with their own thinking aren't truly free. Opening fully to what is, tea leaves free the water to be more than just water. Seeing through itself completely, water frees the leaves to be more than what they could be alone. Being the silent, empty cup that allows all this to happen is called offering others a taste of what they truly are. Under the first category, there's also the term being on the right-hand side. What do I mean by being? I mean who and what you are prior to your identification with thinking. The still, quiet backdrop out of which your thoughts arise and to which they return. The backdrop that is there now, that has always been there, that will always be there, that will be there after this form dissolves. That doesn't change. And in a mind-dominated culture, realizing this to be there is an incredibly radical realization. This is from the Dao of Now. And again, these are titled numerically. All 81 poems in the Dao are titled numerically. 3. Being is like a forest. It has no need of doorways because it is its own portal. It allows entry anywhere without opening a single latch. Wherever you walk, the deep roots are there, but you cannot see them. Getting lost in these trees means the end of circling around and around what you have always been. So how does all this relate to tea? Well, as a spiritual practice, my experience is that the proper preparation and drinking of tea imperceptibly reawakens you to this presence or being. How? By getting you, first of all, to slow down. And again, in a speed-addicted culture, this is incredibly radical. I was walking by a supplement shop downtown a couple weeks ago, and there was a big sign in the window, and it said, green tea capsules, 1 per day. All the benefits of green tea in 1 capsule. I don't think so. Have you ever heard that saying before, you have to look out for the quiet ones? Oh, he or she's a quiet one. Well, tea is like that. Still, quiet, you know it's up to something, and it is. And the inherent stillness in tea, I think, is one of the most important aspects or qualities of tea, is that that stillness that you begin to notice again and again is like noticing the stillness that is you. It's like the stillness that is you recognizes itself in the stillness that is sitting in the bowl of tea. And there's a resonance, and something within begins to wake up. It's like, oh, there I am. There I am. Now, when you've reawakened to this presence or being, you are standing in the door of realizing what the Chinese call Tao. And Tao translates as way or path, but ultimately, Tao can't be named or conceptualized or labeled. And as such, it's really a way that we forge beyond intellectual knowing, which we've already touched on. Tao could be described as the rhythmic flow of nature. You look around, hills flow, coastlines flow, clouds, branches coming out of trees are not straight lines. Water flows. In your own body, your bloodstream flows, your digestive tract, hair coming out of your head if you still have any flows. Even your breathing flows in and out like the ocean waves. So this principle of flow is absolutely key to the Taoist worldview. The second, worldview is shaped and influenced by philosophical ideas about life and the world. That's the Western view. The Eastern view is that empirical observation versus philosophical speculation is what is focused on. The early Taoist sages were empiricists. They looked at how nature worked and they brought themselves into alignment with that. So it's alignment with life as it is, not as you particularly want it to be. 15 from The Hut Beneath the Pine. Tea isn't an idea. Contemplate it all you want. You have to sip it for yourself to taste what it really is. The Tao isn't a concept. The more you forget thinking about it, the easier it is to remember. It's like this. An old monk, 90 years old, wonders, why is it I can't remember anything I learned in school, but can still recall the first dirty joke I ever heard? The Tea House in Spring, after Lu Tong. There's a very famous poem by the Chinese poet Lu Tong, who lived during the Tang Dynasty from about 600 to 900. And at the very end of his poem, The Seven Bowls of Tea, he says, "Oh, the seventh bowl, I'd better not drink it, or I'm off to heaven." The Tea House in Spring, after Lu Tong. I try, but who can read when it's spring and the tulip trees in full bloom across the water? No contest. The black and white pages in books simply can't compete with all this color, the fragrance that comes wafting in when the tea server opens wide the south wall's floor-to-ceiling row of Ming latticework doors. Well, it's all I can do not to leaf out myself, right here in this shaft of sunlight, sipping at my bowl of Jing silver, lifting us both into clouds, into heaven. And Jing silver is a white tea, loose leaf white tea. The third Western Greco-Roman worldview on your list, everything is separate from everything else. This really got going with Aristotle in the 3rd century BC. Aristotle started to categorize things, classify things, and by the time the Middle Ages came around, the Middle Ages was just absolutely obsessed with classifying things. The wheel was really rolling at this point. Excuse me. On the other side, the Eastern Taoist worldview is that everything is interconnected. The universe operates as a great oneness or a totality. There are differentiations, yes, but there are no separate parts. Think of the waves on the ocean. The waves are a manifestation. Are they separate from the ocean? No. In your own body, your body works as a totality, but there are differentiations within your body. Your stomach, your heart, your liver, all differentiations working as a unified whole. And so this is the way the Taoists see the world. Also, the universe in Taoist thought operates in terms of complementary opposites. You've probably heard this referred to as yin and yang. The yin is the cosmic feminine energy, the yang is the cosmic masculine energy. And in the Taoist Chinese mind, yin and yang are always like this. They're always seen as one. So the opposites themselves, back and front, buying and selling, birth and death, those are present in your own body. Your heart opens, it has to close. If you breathe in, you have to breathe out or you'll die. So these complementary opposites are working within you as well. And they are not separate. Think of sound and silence. We think of those as two separate things. From this worldview, sound is silence that has become audible. Activity is stillness that has taken on movement and then becomes still again. Form is formlessness appearing out of and returning to itself. And that is you. There's a wonderful quote by a Bay Area teacher, Adyashanti. He says, "At birth I appear out of myself. In life I dance within myself. At death I disappear back into myself." No two-ness, oneness. "14, the hut beneath the pine. A split in the tea house door lets in the chill. A crack in my teapot's lid lets out the heat. The more you drink from the Tao's oneness, the less energy you will waste trying to keep some things in and others out. Beyond the window, A sudden breeze sends yellow katsura leaves fluttering onto Zither Lake. Oh, perfect. Couldn't be more perfect than that. Zither Lake is the poetic name of the lake at the Chinese garden. Tao is the flow of nature pouring into and out of form. Tea is the flow of nature pouring into and out of your cup. Tea is the Tao in disguise. Tao is what gives rise to everything. Drink and drinker, the cup and the cup's emptiness. Straining thoughts from your mind and words from your tongue, can you savor the one taste? The next Western Greco-Roman piece, beginning with Gilgamesh in around 3000 BC, down through the Greeks, Romans, and to the present day, life is seen as warfare. How many of you have seen Disney's Mary Poppins? Do you remember that line when Mr. Banks, the father of the two children that Mary Poppins is taking care of, he tells her how he wants the children to be raised? And he sings, "The children must be molded, shaped, and taught, that life's a looming battle to be faced and fought." You have to stop and consider what a bizarre worldview this is. That life is a fight from the get-go, and you have to train the children in it because they would never come to that conclusion by themselves. The Dao of Now, 64. When military language permeates a culture, when fighting climate change persistently pummels changing how we live, when battle against cancer repeatedly slays regimen for health, when waging war on terror consistently camouflages the terror of waging war, that culture is already at war with itself. Desire and aversion, conflict and fear. Words of war turn into death sentences. And I don't know if you've ever read Gilgamesh. There's a translation by Geraldine McCaughrean, I think it is. And Gilgamesh came out of Sumeria, drifted down through the Greeks and the Romans to us, to the present day. And Gilgamesh, the people in the Gilgamesh story, he's called Gilgamesh the hero, but they thought he was crazy. I mean, they're looking at him, and he's constantly picking a fight with everyone. He's breaking up people's property, and they think he's nuts. And yet he does all this because he's come to the conclusion that this is the way to clothe himself in immortal glory, the glory of war. The next Western Greco-Roman piece, the universe is unintelligent and mechanistic, and we're talking about Newton's random game of billiards, that the universe is just kind of this spring-loaded mechanism, and everything is random. There's absolutely no rhyme or reason to it, and therefore we constantly have to be at odds with it and fighting it because it can do us in at any moment. The Taoist worldview is that the universe is intelligent. The human mind is only one tiny, tiny facet of this intelligence. And when you let go of knowing with your thinking mind, that universal intelligence is what becomes available. One, Dao of Now. A stream does not come to a rock and have a crisis. Which way do I go? Which way do I go? It simply flows around. The organs in your body, stomach, heart, liver, all know what to do without your having to think. This intelligence is like a shoreless ocean. The human mind, a drop of rain. The drop contains the ocean contains the drop, but is infinitely beyond it. It manifests, permeates, and sustains all things. It pours forth the changeless, silent, formless space within which the world of form ceaselessly comes and goes. Some call this space emptiness, vastness, the present moment. Others call it the now. Simply being, a rare few say nothing, and they have revealed everything. Western Greco-Roman worldview. The earth, the universe, is like an artifact or vessel fashioned by a divine potter. Humans are created in a similar way. Humanity and the planet are imbued with life by an external divine source. The Eastern Taoist worldview, the universe is an organic and relational process, not a mechanism, not an artifact, and not a creation. Humanity, trees, animals, etc. are living outgrowths of the planet versus separate clay creations that are brought to life by an external source. The hut beneath the pine. Is the fish in the water, or is the water in the fish? Are you in the environment, or is the environment in you? Tea, when it cools, becomes the temperature of its surroundings. Your body, when it dies, will do the same. You are the environment, seeing, hearing, smelling, touching, and tasting itself. You are the tea you are drinking before it ever reaches your lips. Dao of Now. Without earth to grow the wheat field, where is the cake? Without water to moisten the pastry dough, where is the pie? Without heat to bake the loaf, where is the bread? Without air to fill the lungs, where is the one to eat? The wise woman knows there is no self separate from everything else. Simple, expansive, she moves through life as life, peering deeply into what is. Having stepped forever beyond inner and outer, she sees her body everywhere. There is no self separate from everything else. If any of you are familiar with Buddhism, you will know that this is the dependent origination teaching, that all things arise together. Nothing exists by itself, separate from everything else. There is no self that exists by itself, separate from everything else. The next one on the left. You have a life. We've all heard that. Get a life! You have a life. It's separate from what you are. Isn't that strange? And on the right, you are life happening, for crying out loud. Dao of Now. Consume bitterness, you are tasting yourself. Make love, you are loving yourself. Witness war, you are watching yourself. Feel the wind, you are feeling yourself. Smell sewage, you are smelling yourself. Enjoy music, you are hearing yourself. Listen to silence, you are being yourself. Morning, noon, and night, the awakened person lives like this, checking the window to see if she is raining, sunny, dark. Because she doesn't have a life but is life, she lives without fear. Because she lives as the world rather than in the world, she has compassion for every being. Because her heart is centered in the now, she feels no need to comprehend it. She simply lets it be herself. Western Greco-Roman worldview, the focus is on past and future. Notice your mind. Where is your mind most of the time? Something in the past, something in the future. And the present moment is completely lost in the West. It's just a stepping stone between the two, back and forth in the mind. In the Eastern Taoist worldview, the focus is on the now or the present moment. And I really love the way Eckhart Tolle, I don't know if you're familiar with The Power of Now, his book, he really presented this in a lovely way to help people to really realize that the now is all there is. And what he says is this. He asks, when has it not been the now or the present moment? When the past happened, it happened in the now. When the so-called future happens, it will happen in the now. When you are sitting here remembering your problematic past or thinking about your problematic future, you are doing it in the now. The now is all there ever actually is. That's it. And yet the mind, I heard one writer say, what is, but the mind keeps thinking us out of what is. And this is a very good example of that. So let's see, let's go to 8. Dao of Now, number 8. The now is easy. People make it hard. The now is here. People put it there. The ego is always wanting this or that to complete itself. The now is always wanting this. The mind is forever seeing itself at the center of everything. The now is forever seeing. Number 11 from the hut beneath the pine. There is an old Buddhist Chinese monk, very, very old. In fact, he lived from around 921 to I don't know when. His name was Chai Chi Hu, and he had 15 poems that he called his Don't Ask poems. And they start out with something like, don't ask me why I keep my gate shut. Don't ask me why I don't meddle around in human affairs. So he seems like this really curmudgeon-y old man, but like most hermit, sage, wise people, he has kind of this twinkle about him as well. So this was my attempt at a don't ask poem that actually doesn't begin don't ask, it begins don't call. Number 11. Don't call it multitasking. This ritual I do, lifting, pouring, setting the pot down again and raising the bowl to my lips. Stepping into the tea room, I shake off the dust of the world. Rinsing off the teaware, I wash away thoughts from my mind. Retreating an hour from the world of men, the only bottom line is the one you are reading right now. The next Western Greco-Roman piece is good versus evil. This is the tendency, this is the worldview in the West, good versus evil. And on the right, the Taoist worldview, the focus is on balance and harmony. The understanding being, if you align yourself with balance and harmony, what we call good will just naturally flow out of that, and you won't have to try very hard. The Taoism is really about taking the path of least resistance if and when you can, like the water that finds its way around the rock in the stream. The Dow of Now, 67. An innocent-looking gap turns into a yawning chasm that swallows the whole house. A once tiny split eventually tears the entire table in two. Beware of systems that make distinctions between them and us, good versus evil, those who know and those who don't know. Draw a line in the dirt between this or that, and you have already dug a trench fertile for the seeds of war. Western worldview, doing, making things happen, pushing the river. And what I mean by pushing the river is exactly what it says. The river doesn't need to be pushed. It doesn't need to be held back. It's much saner to sail than it is to row. And yet for some reason the West has decided to row and row and row against the current. So what is the Taoist worldview? Well, the Taoist worldview is what is called Wu Wei, and this is probably one of the most misunderstood principles in Taoism. Wu means not, Wei means action, so it's non-action or not doing. But it's actually more accurately translated not forcing. Not forcing things to happen that may not want to happen, or keeping things from happening, not forcing things to happen or not happen. And the understanding is that perfect action can arise out of a felt sense of oneness with life. So basically what you have is someone who is so in line with the way the Tao is moving that what it is, it's life responding to itself when something comes up that's challenging. And there's no mess to clean up. And many of you have probably had an experience of Wu Wei in your own life and probably didn't know it. Have you ever done something creative and your thinking mind just vanishes and something is just moving? You're painting, you're writing, you're doing something. In athletics, we call it being in the zone, where the athlete, the thinking mind steps out of the way and the game is just playing the game. The dance is dancing the dance. The poem is writing the poem. And then when it's over, boom, the thinking mind comes in and disregards all that and says, well, I'm in charge now. Thank you very much. And people don't realize you can live your whole life like that. This felt sense of oneness of life responding to itself whenever something arises. And this is what Wu Wei is. Hut 4. The person awakened to the Tao is like a good pot of tea. Strong but not biting, smooth but not weak. She brings people together, permeates the entire room with fragrance without even trying, embodies the one source that fills an infinite variety of cups. This is why people relax in her presence, because she brings what's been gathered on the heights down to where people can taste it. Pours herself freely into emptiness, which is why those around her experience being filled. Ask, and she'll tell you her job is easy. She simply lets whatever comes brew into what it is. 6. Steam curlicues from the spout of my silver tea kettle. Sunlight, my only guest, enters through the window and takes a seat in the chair. In a porcelain gaiwan white as mountain mist or cloud, Jingmai leaves reawaken 10,000 miles from where they began. To a heart rooted in the Tao, what difference does time or distance make? Sipping tea, I taste the contentment of not knowing what my next move will be until it moves. I apologize, I forgot to mention what a gaiwan is. A gaiwan, they were actually the first teapots in China. It's a porcelain, usually a porcelain cup with a saucer and a lid, and you put in the water and the tea leaves, and you put the lid on, and you brew the leaves right in the gaiwan itself. And Jingmai, again, is a white tea. There is a little pavilion at the Garden of Flowing Fragrance in Pasadena, California, or outside of Pasadena in San Marino, a Chinese garden there that just opened at the Huntington Botanical Gardens. And the name of it, the name of the little thatched roof pavilion in the garden that's at the end of a little canyon, it's just stunning. It's called the Pavilion for Washing Away Thoughts. Compare that to Descartes. Quite different. This is entitled At the Pavilion for Washing Away Thoughts, and Cha Dao translates the way of tea. Thinking outside the box, thinking is the box. No time like the present has nothing to do with time. The one truth you can believe, that nothing you believe is ultimately true. Meditation is like life. The harder you try to force something to happen or not happen, the more difficult both become. Cha Dao is like life. The way becomes a struggle only when your mind thinks the tea should taste different than it does. The master has emptied her cup of all thoughts. She has no argument with whatever life pours out. Lovingly, serenely, she holds the world to her lips. Sipping only what is, she ends every war. And the last piece of the Western Greco-Roman worldview, pursuit of happiness is an inalienable right. On the right, the Taoist Eastern worldview, happiness is within. It will elude you forever if you let the mind turn it into an external object to be pursued. This is number 3 in the hut. The qi. Many of you are probably familiar with qi in China. It's the life force energy. Cheng Hao was a poet of the Sung dynasty. He wrote a poem called A Casual Poem on a Spring Day, where he hears people saying that he's wasting his time and he's wasting his life, but he says they just can't see the joy in my heart. 3. The time taken for tea takes a lifetime. How can this be so? The first steeping is like youth, potent, powerful. Its brash strength often leads to bitterness. The second tastes of middle age. Flowing like Tao, the flavors mellow and balanced. There's enough life left in the leaves for more. Like an old man or woman, the third has lost its vigor. The colors pale, the qi weak. Writing poetry, drinking tea. People say I'm acting childish, wasting my life, approaching old age with nothing to show for it, just like joy-filled Cheng Hao. And number 6 from the Dao of Now. Spiritual paths are like lovers. The true ones aren't good-looking. The good-looking ones are seldom, if ever, true. Living in an alpine valley, a person comes to believe that the path to fulfillment and happiness lies on the other side of the mountain. The person living opposite believes the same. Now where do you go? Remain where you are and arrive without departing. Remain where you are not and there is only the one, still, silent, complete unto itself. It is like the mountain that sees all of its sides at once without having to look. I'd like to read two more poems from The Hut Beneath the Pine and one poem from the manuscript that I mentioned at the beginning in this Forest of Monks, and then we'll open it up for questions. This is entitled At the Hermitage. A hermitage is a place where a hermit lives. A chill wind blows through my tiny wood stove. The last gust extinguishes it for the fourth time. Embers at this late hour barely illumine the room. In such scant light, don't we all let go of what we thought we were looking for? Hopes, dreams, the second book of matches. My aging hands measuring tea leaves in the dark, letting whatever unfolds be enough. I think I'd like to conclude with one from The Hut Beneath the Pine. So I'm going to read one from In This Forest of Monks, if I can find it. As I mentioned, I was a Trappist monk, or as Tom mentioned, I was a Trappist monk for 6 years. And one of the visitors to the abbey quite frequently was Tom Crawford, wonderful local poet. And I was reading one of Tom's poems one day, and this poem came out of that. It's called Bowing to Birds. And Cistercian, the Cistercians, Trappist Cistercians, are basically the religious order that I was in. Trappists. Trappist is a nickname for a later reform of the Cistercian monks that happened in the Abbey of Le Trappe in Normandy in about the 1700s. So Cistercian is the order of monks. Juncos, I bow this morning, not to these fallen feathers of snow I'm shoveling, but to you, the most Cistercian of birds. Your black-hooded flock pecking at the branches of the apple tree in such numbers, I lose track of you, the way I sometimes lose track of myself in the church after dark, when I'm alone, and what can't be seen is all there is to feed on. And I'd like to close with a poem that was inspired by another wonderful local poet, Penelope Scambly-Schott, from her book, Six Lips. The title of her poem is Now That I Live Among the Baboons. And the title of this poem is Now That I Realize Inner and Outer Are One. And again, if you've been to the Chinese garden, you may have noticed, or maybe you didn't notice, that the garden really begins to blur the distinctions, the rigid distinctions we have between what is inner and what is outer. You step into the first courtyard, and I'll sometimes ask people, is this inner space or is it outer space? And someone will say, oh, it's both. Exactly. We walk around with our commentary in our head going on all the time, saying, I am me inside this sack of skin, and everything outside of me is not me, and it's all happening to me. Is that true? Is the fish in the water, or is the water in the fish? Are you in the environment, or is the environment in you? Now that I realize inner and outer are one. And I better also state, Wi-Fi, everyone knows what Wi-Fi is. Up until about 2 months ago, I was pronouncing it Wi-Fi and was corrected. Yes, the technological dinosaur here. And an I Ching spout. I Ching teapots are those little clay teapots that I used to think were decorative for a long time, but they're actually used. And they're made out of I Ching clay or purple sand clay from the eastern region of China. And they provide incredible temperature control for brewing tea, especially pu'er teas and oolong teas. So there's a reference in this to I Ching. Now that I realize inner and outer are one. The tea house door squeaks with laughter at its own joke. It opens the widest of loves to everything I have failed to let in or out. The tea house door mocks my taking sides. It centers itself squarely again and again in the still, quiet space prior to coming and going. It unlocks all my deadbolt beliefs in life as push and pull. A sign that reads, "Turn off cell phones, please," floats in its pool of clear glass. No Wi-Fi here either. No high-speed anything. Service is slow, the way tea flowing from an I Ching spout is slow. The door has no idea which side is other. The dreams it swings into and out of are hingeless. As unaware of tarnish as it is of its own shine, see how the door's brass pull ring gives itself in marriage to every extended hand, how it weds us at its center to the emptiness that opens everything. Thank you. Questions? Confusion? Yes, Maggie. Infusion. More appropriate.
Thank you, Daniel, for reminding me of things that I knew but I'd forgotten. And I think we all feel that after listening to your points. My question is, in this chaotic time, this society that we live in this culture we live in, how do you find the now in your day?
How do I find the now in my day?
What things that you do or do not do so you can find that quiet, that center?
I was talking to someone when I came in. I have made personal choices that I've had the luxury to be able to make, and I realize not everyone has the luxury of making the choices that I have made. I've also spent 8 years of my life in a monastic setting, which really showed me there are so many things I can do without. I don't own a cell phone. I don't have email at home. I don't have internet at home. I don't have a microwave. I don't own a car. When it changed to digital television, I don't have television anymore. So the techno-distraction piece is a huge, huge piece, I think, in the culture. That, again, as I mentioned at the beginning when I was talking about the hut beneath the pine, the time it takes up. There was a recent study done, and I don't remember where it was done, but the outcome of it was that most children now between the ages of 6 and 18 are spending almost as much time on the internet per day as they sleep. Where do you find time to be? Where do you find time, again, to notice the birds, to notice and connect with who and what's around you? So those are some choices I've made. I've also made choices to maintain a spiritual practice that I have. The writing is part of that. Sitting meditation is part of that. The garden is certainly part of that. Going to the garden once a week is incredibly therapeutic and is incredibly, incredibly sanity-inducing. Just being able to reconnect with that natural space, which, albeit it is a human-made natural space, but still nature is doing what it's doing. The plants are doing what they're doing, the birds, the water, and so it's this way, it's this, again, this jewel box in the middle of the city that is like a reminder. And the tea practice as well is a spiritual practice. So doing that, I do that every day. And it doesn't have to be for a long period of time. It can be for 10 minutes. If you're at a computer all day, can you stop for a minute and just become present to where you are. The mind will say, oh no, there's no time for that. That's not true. 1 minute, 5 times a day, just to stop and notice. It's a way to begin to pull back in rather than being externalized all the time, which is where most of us are most of the time. We're being pulled out of ourselves by the culture, by the technology, and the mind contracts around objects, either externally or internally, its own thoughts. Thoughts are energetic forms that the mind is constantly glomming onto. So those are ways that I try to maintain sanity in the midst of what you refer to as an increasingly insane, chaotic culture.
That's very courageous. Yeah.
It also becomes very difficult to function because the technology is so insidious. I find it insidious that now you don't, I mean, Tom and I were going on about the email and trying to function without email. It's like a rotary phone. You know, how many people have rotary phones? Very good. 2 hands shoot up. Anyone else? Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, as a monk, the Trappist idea, I assume out here in Lafayette.
Yes.
You're semi-hermetic, I would imagine, in most of the work. Would that be quite, or could you set up a Tao within that community?
Could you set up something Taoist within the Trappist community? You're right. The Trappists are much more contemplative and removed from the world than a lot of religious orders are, even the Benedictines at Mount Angel, who have parishes and school. They teach in the seminary and whatnot. So it is a much more contemplative life. It's a more removed life. When I was there, the abbot who was abbot at the time, who has since died, had a very strong Zen focus. And I think that was a bone of contention that went on with some members of the community and himself. So he was already trying to do that. And when I was in formation there, meditation, sitting meditation, was just part of the formation. So his Zen thrust was informing the training of the younger monks, and it was also impacting the community, for better or for worse, in other ways as well. Now keep in mind, Zen in Japan, Taoism is really the mother of Zen. Because Taoism, of course, goes back thousands of years in China, and then Buddhism doesn't make it to China until about the 2nd century AD. It was a real latecomer. And eventually, Buddhism syncretizes with Taoism and becomes Chan Buddhism. And Chan Buddhism then makes it over to Japan and becomes Zen. So Taoism really is the mother of Zen.
The difference between Zen and Tao?
My goodness, that's the difference between Zen and Tao.
That's a Western thought, isn't it?
Yeah, what's the difference between Zen and Tao? A Zen master would say no difference. It's all one. But they both influenced one another so much, I don't know how you could really pick out. I'd be artificially kind of, I think, trying to grab at picking out threads to create a, distinction between the two. Obviously, the Japanese did their own things with it. It meshed very well with the Bushido philosophy of the samurai. That's why it was adopted. So that's one piece that obviously Taoism didn't have. They didn't have the samurai and those pieces. And also Zen also carried over the tea ceremony into China after the Sung and the Tang dynasties fell. After the Sung dynasty fell, the tea ceremony in China was completely lost. In fact, in later texts, they write about finding the tools for the tea ceremony, and they don't even know what they are. That's how badly the culture was obliterated. But by that time, fortunately, it had made it to Japan, and they had maintained it within the Zen monasteries really as a spiritual religious ritual. Yeah.
Yeah, I wondered if you could say anything about Thomas Merton. He seemed to kind of bridge the East and the West.
Thomas Merton. Oh, dear Thomas. Father Lewis at Gethsemane Abbey in Kentucky was a Trappist, very famous for his social writing and outspokenness and for his conflicts with his abbot, with his superior. Thomas was an incredible intellect, I think, in a very small space. And I think the Eastern influence for Thomas was really salvific. Because if you go back to when Thomas had his conversion experience, I think he was on a train somewhere and he was reading a Christian theologian, I can't remember who it was. And he read the line on the page, God is not a being. God is being itself. Well, Thomas read that and everything just exploded. And then within the next couple of pages of this journal, you see him going right back into his intellect again and going, now that I know this, I will be able to begin searching for it and trying to find it and all this effort. And it's like, you had it right there. But the Western mindset won't allow you to go there. And Alan Watts wrote a book about this. It's called The Book, The Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are. That the Western culture will not let you realize that you are the divine in disguise. It's taboo. And so, really, the only leap that Thomas had to make was, oh, God isn't a being, God is being itself. Be being and be God. That's it. But we have conceptions of God in the West that are not necessarily what's going on. If you think of God as some omnipotent figure in the sky who snaps his fingers and makes things happen, you go, well, I can't do that. I'm obviously not God. But if you go to Hindu Vedanta, God is hidden in everything. The divine is playing a game of hide and seek with itself. Not some grand high king on a throne sitting in the clouds somewhere. So you go to India, and what do when they greet you? They go, Namaste. I greet the divine in you. And Daniel Ladinsky, when he translated some of Hafiz's poetry, he has a wonderful dedication. It says, to God's great masquerade as us. So I hope Thomas realized that before he died. And again, I think that's why the East was so salvific for him, because I think his intellect was so powerful that I think the East hopefully began to pull him out of that identification just with everything in his head. Yeah, David.
So in your poems, you used the pronoun she.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Why she?
Why she?
Yeah.
A number of reasons. One, in Taoism was very egalitarian. Women were Taoist masters, men were Taoist masters. Within the context of a Confucian society that was very rule-bound and protocol-bound and very male-dominant. The Chinese garden during that era, the era of the scholars, Ming-Qing dynasty, 14th century up until 1911, women were being foot-bound during this time. But you can't escape your culture. So I wanted to be sure to say she, because that is the tradition, and also because she is so overlooked in our culture. And so trying to pull, the male-dominated piece, over this way a little bit and give more of an equal footing to women as well, to wise women.
It seemed to me like somewhere that they asked one of the Zen masters what the meaning of Tao was,
Mm-hmm.
and he remained silent. And the student was after him for an answer when the answer was silence.
Mm-hmm.
So did you find that as a conflict in your own life, to write these poems in explanation of your being? Is that a struggle for you, or do you find a conflict within your being that you're driven to express yourself when silence is the answer to the Tao?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Keep in mind, you're all familiar, or most of you are probably familiar with the Tao Te Ching that was penned by someone we think was named Lao Tzu around the 6th century BC sometime. Could have been written by him. That's the legend, that he wrote it for a border guard as he was leaving the country because the country was so screwed up he didn't want to deal with it anymore. And the border guard said, please write down your teachings before you leave. So in one night he supposedly wrote all this down. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. You know, Lao Tzu writes the Tao Te Ching. He writes and writes about what can't be talked about, and he uses 5,000 characters to talk about what can't be talked about. But that's what we have. That's what we have. The important thing is to remember that the words are just pointers. Don't get hung up in the words. It's like the old, going back to Zen, it's like the old Zen saying, the moon, the finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. It's the finger. And yet the Western mind wants to put the finger under a microscope and go, how long is it? How old is it? It wants all this information, and it misses what it's pointing to. So again, we're coming back to that. Just let the words wash over very lightly. If there is truth in the words, if there is presence informing the words, if there's being informing the words, that will resonate on a level that your conscious mind probably isn't even going to be aware of. And something inside of, I think Maggie mentioned, you know, oh, it's like hearing something that I'd forgotten that some part of me remembers. It's almost like some part begins to kind of wake up and go, oh, I hear myself out there somewhere. Where have I been for so long? So if there is truth and there is presence in the words, it will resonate with that deeper level. And that's why, you know, focusing only on the words isn't going to cut it. Yeah.
This isn't a question, it's an observation. Oh, first, thank you so much for your
Well, thank you for coming.
poems, but it's an observation that occurred to me and has something to do with language, is I was thinking that what if our language had evolved with only the present tense?
Mm-hmm.
So that we wouldn't be hung up on things from the past and the future.
Yeah, our language influences us enormously. And yeah, what if our language only had the present tense? And there are languages that are much closer to that. Chinese, as a matter of fact. And that's why it's so hard for a lot of Westerners to figure out Chinese, or to get, you know, Chinese Americans to be on time some of the times, because the language is so present focused. And it's also a pictographic language that, you know, the characters are derived from pictograms from nature. So it's actually one step closer to the natural world, and it activates a completely different part of the brain than Western language, which has been completely abstracted by the Greeks from the Hebrew. And, you know, you talk about a bird says nothing about a bird. But you see a picture of a bird in a written pictographic language, that lets you know what it is. You still have a connection in the language to the natural world. If we called a bird tweeter, that might be a little closer, because you still have some connection with the sound that the bird makes, but bird tells you absolutely nothing about the bird. It's just a label. And as soon as you go, oh, there's a bird, now what's the next thing? You deaden the experience of it. You don't see the bird anymore. In fact, I think it was Krishnamurti who wrote, as soon as you teach the child that a bird is a bird, they will never see the bird again. And so what we really need to be saying is, this is what we call a bird. We don't know what it is, but we call it this so we can talk about it. But you look around, and if you start doing that, if you start letting go of the names and the labels, which are very practical tools, but you no longer confuse the tool with the mystery, everything begins to take on life again. It's this incredible mystery that's unfolding, and we really don't know what it is. Thank you.
Daniel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.